will continue to take action. I think our biggest lesson is to listen to you, because SCOPA represents our clients, and to respond accordingly to your suggestions. So just to reiterate that it is unfortunate that we're coming here today to report to you in this way. However, we'll be happy to cover the questions themselves. Chair, I'm not sure if you would like me to cover each one of them at this point. I will be asking my team as well to assist with the questions. So if I lead you to page 4, to the first question that you asked to us about the quantum of contracts with state and constitutional institutions for the past 3 years. I'm going to ask Modise, our Head of Public Service, to answer that.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you, Chair, again. Chair, in response to the question, we've made a submission that details the actual work that we've done with the state in the past 3 years. You would notice that in the table in question for 2015 specifically, we billed the state an amount of about 579 million rounded. In the 2016 year, we had about 485 million, and in the 2017, we had 456. The next question that we had was around the number of contracts themselves. In this regard, particularly around 2017, we had active contracts with organs of state in the region of about 222. In our response, we have not stated that number merely because the billing process and the transacting process with the state is determined on a mandate basis, is determined on a project basis, and in that regard, we've given the numbers in question. Suffice to say that for the 2017 financial year, which is the KPMG financial year, we had in excess of about 1,300 mandates that we were executing on in delivery of work we've secured with the state. Can I hand over back to you?
Thank you, Modise. Chair, we will go through all of them. If there are no questions, we can take them at the end.
We'll take questions after you're done with your presentation.
Thank you. Then the next question is still on page 4. It's around appointing personnel to projects, our client interaction, and preparation of reports and handover to clients. So I'm just going to introduce part of the concepts, and we'll ask Gary to add commentary. At any point in time, we engage in a variety of projects, and these will range from tax-related projects to advisory to audit projects. And when we look at the type of work that we've done for our public institutions, they have ranged along those lines. The typical project will be led by an engagement partner, which is one of our senior people. And together with the engagement partner or the business unit, they will be able to allocate personnel. The choices around personnel are mainly based on the skill that's required by the job, and the engagement team usually will be tested for the necessary qualifications as well as skills. We also spend a lot of time ensuring that our professionals have continuous development as well to make sure they can service our clients. We sometimes procure services from specialists, and sometimes not in the employ of KPMG South Africa, depending on what the work request is. And the engagement partner is responsible for communicating any feedback, any discussions around the project, or any detail directly with the client. And they are responsible for communicating directly with the client at all times, although the team members will be able to also communicate with the client from time to time. We are generally guided by our contracts. I think this is important to mention, that we will have different terms of reference from time to time, and our deliverables are based on what is agreed in our contracts. Just looking at these points, I don't know if it will be helpful to go through all of them, but I'll hand over to Gary to raise any additional issues around that.
Sure. You know, the terms of our engagement are governed by our engagement letters, and typically the engagement partner, you know, is responsible for the quality of all deliverables, which include ensuring that all deliverables are consistent with the terms of the engagement letter. He is responsible, or she is responsible, for reviewing and approving significant deliverables prior to their delivery to the client, and preparing deliverables that are in accordance with KPMG's policies, procedures, professional standards, and legal and regulatory requirements. Where engagements are allocated or considered to be high risk, our policies require the appointment of a second reviewing partner who is required to review the final deliverable and to consult on any significant or high risk issues. Typically, engagement deliverables are usually restricted to clients and any other parties specifically identified in our engagement terms, and these are subject to caveats and other restrictions as relevant in the circumstances.
Okay, then if we go to the next question, that's on page 6. KPMG South Africa's understanding of the practical legal implication of declaring a report final and handing it over to clients. So the issuing of reports, whether in draft or final form, is regulated by client requests on specific contracts. The value and significance of a report, whether in draft or final form, differs from case to case depending on the type of service being offered. In some cases, the value of the work lies in the production of the final report. In others, the value of the work lies in the services themselves, with a report merely standing as a summary or description of the work performed. This is an important differential to understand, because in the area of forensic services, the question whether KPMG South Africa will produce a report, whether in draft or final form, or any particular piece of work, depends on what has been agreed with the client and will be subject to specific client requests according to the provisions of the terms of engagement. KPMG South Africa places a duty on all engagement leaders to employ skill and diligence in reviewing the work product before it's delivered to our clients. It is the duty of the engagement partner to ensure the quality, as already mentioned by Gary. Now, work from time to time is selected as part of our quality performance reviews, and the final work product is reviewed together with the working papers. This is usually done by a separate partner who has not been involved in the work. This form of review can also be done by our international colleagues to ensure that standards have been met. If for any reason we receive information suggesting the work that has been done for clients does not meet standards, we will consider the information and, if appropriate, deal with it by way of review of the work performed. It's important to mention that in the case of the SARS report, a KPMG international investigation assessed whether the engagement team in performing the work did so in accordance with our methodologies, our standards, processes, and procedures, and whether the work that was performed was in compliance with our risk management protocols. This investigation did not involve doing the underlying work, so we were looking at standards, processes, procedures. They did not redo the underlying work. Whenever it does come to our attention that our work has fallen short, we seek to correct it. It is important that this view is communicated to the client, and it may, depending on the circumstances, be necessary to communicate it to others. In this case, given the failure to appropriately apply our own risk management and quality controls, KPMG South Africa decided that part of the report which refers to conclusions, recommendations, and legal opinions should no longer be relied upon. This was communicated in the public statement on 15 September 2017. With respect to communications to SARS, we informed SARS of our conclusion and intention to make the statement on the 15th of September 2017 in advance of making the actual public statement. Given the urgency with which we felt we needed to act following the international investigation, it was not possible for us to provide SARS with more time to consider the practical implications of this, if any. We have offered to engage with SARS and remain available to do so.
All right, I think the next question relates to how KPMG South Africa bills its clients, which are billed in terms of the agreed engagement letters and contracts with clients, which is largely the timing of the invoice is largely determined by the nature of the project or work to be done. When dealing with short-term or less complex projects, invoices are presented on a milestone basis, and when specific deliverables are handed over to the client. With longer-term projects or more complex projects, that's subject to specific terms agreed with our clients, which are typically on a monthly basis or at other appropriate intervals.
Okay.
Thank you. The next question was the one that referred to paragraph 6.2, and I'll read through it. It said, how was this followed in the instance of KPMG South Africa's work in the Program Management Office of the IFMS at National Treasury? We have noted the suggestion, certainly in the letter inviting us to meet with SCOPA, that KPMG South Africa received irregular payments in the IFMS project of National Treasury. From our perspective, we do not believe that there is any basis at all for the suggestion that any payment made to KPMG South Africa in that project was irregular. It has never been suggested to KPMG South Africa by any of the officials from National Treasury responsible for the project that any of the work that we've delivered fell short of the required standard, or that we did not deserve any of the payments that we've received. Also, the invoices supporting the invoices and the supporting documents to what we've billed to National Treasury has been subject to inspection and interrogation by the officials in question. So from our perspective, we remain confident that the invoices that we've issued were supported accordingly. The invoices that we've issued were in accordance with the contracts that we've signed. The invoices that we issued were managed in the context of project governance structures agreed to with the client.
And Chairperson, I will reiterate just the last question that was asked around why should SCOPA have confidence in us. I've already mentioned that we work in a highly regulated profession, and this is important to us to comply to any regulations and to ensure that we cooperate with any such regulations, which we have been in conversation with our regulator and have committed to complying with any investigation. It's also important to reiterate that we do employ 3,400 professionals who serve the organization, and they serve the organization with distinction. In this case, we have had a few of our people erring. We acknowledge that, and we would like to assure you that we will continue to take strong action to be accountable for those failings that we've identified. And in that vein, we also support an independent inquiry to be established to ensure that if there's any further action that requires to be taken, we take that and open ourselves up to that scrutiny, because we believe it's important to rebuild public trust and to ensure that you as a recipient of our services can be rest assured that we will correct where we make mistakes, and that the majority of our people are really out there doing good work for the government and its institutions. Thank you.
Right. You are done with presentation from your side. Okay. Thanks very much. Ross?
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the comprehensive reports in writing. I think that would assist us a lot, and thank you to you, Chairperson, for posing those questions in advance. It makes my job much easier. But first of all, I'd just like to, ma'am, to give you an idea why we are at SCOPA are so interested to talk to you. Primarily, we are the committee fighting corruption, and we look at all issues with regards to corruption, but we also look at issues to improve the quality of financial management in departments, and specifically in the state-owned entities. And we understand today that KPMG is definitely not regulated by SCOPA. We appreciate you coming here, and we appreciate the openness and also your answering of the questions in writing. But however, we need to also ask you some questions in regard to this. I know that the regulator and Mr. the Auditor General will know that you are being regulated by SAICA and by IRBA, and that there is currently investigations, if I understand, from those two institutions regarding that. And we'll ask you some questions on that. But just in terms of the bigger picture, you have to play a substantive role in the financial management and security of state institutions through auditing, forensic investigation, asset management, and review. But I would like to ask you, ma'am, you are not an auditor by profession, and I think it's quite a daunting task that you have. Could you perhaps just define the role of an auditing firm for us just in a very short sentence?
Thank you, Sam. I am not an auditor by profession, and I have been tasked with leading a firm that has different skills in it, and its history and basis is that of auditing. So it's really important that I mention that of the partner group, as well as the staff that I manage, the majority of them are qualified chartered accountants, and they have a responsibility to ensure that they are complying to all the standards that are required of them as chartered accountants as well as registered auditors. So whilst I'm not in the profession myself, I have spent collectively over 7 years working with my colleagues from the profession. I'm ensuring that there is a highly qualified leadership team that comes from an auditing base to ensure that we continue to stay relevant and we continue to ensure our compliance to any auditing standards. And this is why, if I'm flanked by our acting board chairperson, Gary, who's an auditor himself, and Modise, who's introduced himself as a chartered accountant. So that, I don't know if that is an adequate answer.
Thank you very much. Yes, just in terms of the regulation, I think the audit fees are regulated, but in terms of your consulting role in KPMG, it's mainly unregulated. Do you agree with that? In terms of the fees and in terms of consulting, it's not regulated as strictly in terms of the function that you have as a consultant also to your clients. Advancing business opportunities, perhaps furthering the client's interest. Is it regulated or is it not regulated in terms of the consulting?
In terms of the consulting, the work that is done is really assessed from the basis of the amount of time required and the effort that is required. That's how it's generally calculated. There isn't any fee regulation that I'm aware of. However, we calculate the effort that's required to complete a piece of work.
What percentage of your work is in terms of the consulting appropriate?
Let me clarify the question. Are you wanting to know the...
Yes, I know. You have you have forensic investigations, you have the audit function, and then you have consulting. In terms of consulting, in terms of percentage of the allocation of work from the state and state departments, can you give me an indication as a guide to consulting? Percentage. Just an indication.
Yeah, I can answer the question. Broadly speaking, advisory type of work constitutes almost 40% of our business. You asked a question earlier on about whether are we is the non-audit services regulated or not. To a large extent, yes. But having said that, KPMG as a firm itself has got its own processes to manage the brand, processes to position the brand in the market. And key to that is the process around risk management processes. And in that regard, we do have engagements within the non-audit services that get selected as part of our QP process.
Yes.
I could have stopped him a little earlier, but my mic was not working because I think he was going off tangent. His boss has said that the fee structure is not regulated. And so the other stuff that was talking to, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for your intervention. Yes, you see there's a huge amount of work that you do. It's completely unregulated in terms of fees. And perhaps it's something that the profession should look into. SCOPA, it's not our domain, and we're definitely not, for the record, we're not regulating you. But at the recent events indicating misconduct from KPMG, the committee is extremely concerned with regards to the integrity and appropriateness of KPMG as a service provider to the state. We know that you're dealing with huge amounts in terms of contracts. I just have some information that I received this morning with regards to your, I believe it's your forensic invoicing of about 106 million. Is that an annual amount? That excludes, of course, the audit and tax functions. So we are dealing with huge money and cost to the state, and then we have, unfortunately, different allegations against KPMG's business and a great concern. Now, I'm putting this to you. Is it not the tip of the iceberg that it's only that the SARS KPMG debacle is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of a very small amount, but that there's a systemic problem perhaps in KPMG as to the huge amount of contracts that you have with the state. And as stated in your response to the committee, point 3.2, ma'am, KPMG has entered into 1,301 projects with the state and constitutional institutions last year only, and in the last 3 years it was plus minus 4,000 projects. Now the cost of that to the state is immense, and we as a committee should be equally concerned as to the cost to the state and whether that is managed appropriately. Now, is it a systemic problem, perhaps, that we can encounter this in all projects, or was this only an isolated incident that brought the attention of the public to this? And then I will proceed. We're talking more on the macro now, not specifically on that, on all your projects, which is of huge concern to this committee. Does it present a systemic risk at KPMG that pose a great risk for the state?
So, thank you for the question. We are also concerned about that, and that was obviously for us. This is about our work. What we have done is we have checked and we have gone back to the evidence that we have that shows that all our quality performance reviews, we generally have performed the bulk of our work. You talk at a macro level to the satisfaction of our own international standards. Also, the bulk of our work does get checked by other reviewers from across our network. And in the auditing space, we also have other entities that check. And we are satisfied that we generally do perform within the right levels compared to our peers. You asked the question, is it systemic? We have not found any evidence to show that it is a systemic problem inside the organization. When KPMG International performed the investigation, they did not find any signal of it being a systemic problem. But we're currently managing
was KPMG International reviewing all your work, or were they merely reviewing your SARS report?
So perhaps I should clarify. In this instant, the investigation was for the SARS report, as well as the work that we did for the Oak Bay, a private entity. However, on an annual basis, we do have quality reviews on our work, because the question was around the macro-systemic issues.
No, that's fine. It's just that your response said when KPMG International investigated that they did not find any systemic. Now, for them not to find any systemic issues, it means they must have reviewed almost everything. But if they only dealt with those two, then your response does not as yet talk to his question.
So, Chair, perhaps to clarify, on an annual basis, we do get reviewed.
No, that's fine. Let me revert back to him, because this very two were also part of these annual reviews. And in those annual reviews, they were never picked up until there was an investigation by KPMG International. Continue.
Chair, and perhaps I can come in here to assist with perhaps requests to you. And it's only a request, and I hope that perhaps you will comply with the request. And I'd just like to remind you, we're not your regulator. But considering that KPMG has entered into 3,948 contracts over the last 3 years with the state and constitutional institutions, I wonder if an isolated approach will identify or rectify any systemic issues. And perhaps if we can request schedules from you with regards to lists and details, as far as you can provide to this committee, with regards to contracts entered between KPMG and the state, the current contracts, we would like to have the current contracts. We would like to know, perhaps in the last 3 years, some of the issues that you could identify, and perhaps going forward, the contracts currently tendered for. I have some information as I've indicated before, of 106 million, but the amount seems to me very limited. Perhaps, in terms of finances, I'm not quite sure, because you've built SARS 23 million, which is about a fifth of this amount. 106, I'm not sure about the amounts that you build, but perhaps if you can give, and you don't have to answer it, I think it's confidential information, but if you would like to do it in writing, we can also accept. But just to guide us in terms of our request, to make sure that there's no looting of the state funds, which is our primary function of SCOPA, to ensure that the public funds paid per invoice is, at least there's value for money, that the expenditure of the state is well spent. I think that's where SCOPA comes in, that we prevent irregular expenditure. In that line, what would you think of these requests and perhaps recommendations from us?
So we are open to compiling that information and submitting it to you in writing in due course.
Thank you, Chair. Then, with regards to the inquiry that you've welcomed, we know about the inquiry from SAICA and IRBA. Are you having any, what are you proposing in terms, if you say you would welcome an independent inquiry, and what perhaps is the progress from your side in initiating such an inquiry? Is there any?
So what we propose is an independent inquiry led by a lead figure in the legal fraternity. It is our desire to provide assurance to yourselves and our other clients, as well as the South African public, that the work done by International, as well as any other issues that may arise, will be fully dealt with.
By independent, you mean independent to KPMG management, or you mean independent to SAICA and even the regulatory body?
So with independent, we're implying independent to KPMG and KPMG International, because we've already had that done. IRBA is also continuing with an investigation that they are doing, so we support that.
All right. Okay, yeah. That's fine.
Thank you. I believe that in terms of the broader aspect, we've dealt with the questions, but I would just like to go a little bit deeper into perhaps 3 or 2 events. The one is the Vrede Dairy Community Project in the Free State, where KPMG was involved, and where we have a reclassification in terms of the expenditure of Festina. I believe it's a Gupta-linked company. And you perhaps can give us the information that the expenses were reclassified as business operations, which expenses that were used for a wedding, and that KPMG have signed off on that. What would your response be to this?
Well, just firstly to clarify, KPMG is not the auditor to Festina or involved with the Free State Dairy Project. We were the auditor to Linkway, which was an Oak Bay company. So from a KPMG point of view, our interest lies in the audit of Linkway and other Oak Bay companies. Insofar as the expenditure in Linkway, we have noted your question regarding the wedding expenses. This company operated as an events company, and the wedding expenditure that was incurred in that company was reimbursed from another company called Accurate Investments, a Dubai-based company of which we were not the auditor, and that expenditure was incurred in Linkway. I don't know if I've answered your question fully.
No, you certainly did. But, you know, sometimes when you line up a whole list of companies, it's like shifting the blame from one company to the other and eventually finding a events company. But we'll look into that. I think you've answered my question. Then with regards to the substandard report on the SARS rogue unit investigation, I just have a few questions on that. Ma'am, you do understand that in terms of the rogue unit and the reports, the revised report, that it had huge political and financial and perhaps economic implications for the country, that you've revised the report, or even that the first report was perhaps substandard and did not meet the requirements. It is not only of importance to KPMG, but it's important to the country. And I have to ask these questions in the line of those observations that I'm making. I believe there were 35 people working on the SARS report, and there were a couple of people accused of being aware of the rogue unit, and illegal and unprofessional conduct were alleged. Why were none of these accused ever interviewed by the 35 people in your company working on this report? Were there any interviews? My information is there were never any interrogation, or they were never called to explain. And perhaps if you would could you clarify the different reports and perhaps in terms of the timeline, and why was it revised?
So perhaps just to clarify the first part of the question, the scope of work was that it was a documentary review, so it was looking at actual information that was provided by the client. And in terms of the different reports, we do generally provide draft reports to management in provision of our work, and from time to time there could be revisions or an ask for the scope to change, which is what happened in this case. So that was the reason why there were different reports submitted.
Just follow up on that, ma'am. Is it possible that you can present us with the briefing notes in terms of the mandate of this, or is it confidential and private to the company, of this reports?
So this is where I mentioned that we actually have contracts with institutions of the state. We would have to converse with SARS and ensure that we're not overstepping any of those mandates.
The report was also partly retracted. Why was the report not retracted in full? Or was it just with regard to the conclusions, the recommendations, and the legal findings that you retracted? Those three issues seems to be the issues that in a letter from your attorneys to SARS, it is not to be considered, which is a very good English word, I believe. But it has major implications in terms of this. And may I ask, who was the legal opinion that you sought, or is that also confidential?
So KPMG International's remit of doing the review and the investigation was looking at processes, our risk procedures, our methodology followed. So they did not redo the actual body of the work, and the recommendation that the recommendations as well as conclusions, that aspect of the report could not be relied upon, were based on the way that risk processes were managed during the conducting of this report. So this is not a review of the actual detail of the report, so we would not be able to comment on withdrawing the whole report.
Was the review initiated by KPMG International, and why was it that the international arm of KPMG intervened into the South African KPMG investigations and reports, specifically on this one?
As an international firm, there is a requirement from time to time for our international partners to provide support on the ground, and KPMG South Africa did request KPMG International to assist to provide a level of objectivity and to test our work against our own global standards.
Ma'am, I'd just like to know, once the final report was concluded, you did send it.
Just a minute.
May I, Chair, or would you like to intervene?
Yeah, no, on the question that you have asked, I thought the question was, well, if that is your response, why did you request KPMG International's assistance on this specific report? If that was your initiative, or was there a body of reports that you requested to be reviewed, or was it just this one? And if it was just this one, on what basis was it lifted out of the many reports that you have done, and more so maybe a year after it was actually presented?
Thank you, Chair. The reason why we asked International was to look at two areas of work that we had done in the recent past that had been reviewed to some extent by the South African firm, and we wanted additional assurance on how the work was done. So it was a request to look at that. We do from time to time ask KPMG International to perform reviews, as I already mentioned.
Why specifically on these two? I think that's the number of the question.
Okay, so the number of the question is specifically these two, and it's specifically because these had become issues that were raised in the public, and we recognize the public interest that they hold, and we wanted to make sure that we can provide clarity and objectivity and openness in how the work was done.
Imagine that from your risk management point of view, from probably the very word go, they should have been categorized as high risk and therefore entailed all manner of scrutiny, and not go after them as an afterthought. Anyway, continue.
Yes, Chair, it is very interesting to note that I believe the report was sent to the former Minister of Finance just before the budget, in the February budget. Is that correct? To whom was this report sent? You've compiled the report, the first report then implicating the rogue unit, unlawful conduct, and that report went out to Minister of Finance, a former Minister of Finance, just before the budget. Is that correct? Because there was a response in the budget in February. We as politicians knows that, we know that. There was a response from the minister, the former Minister of Finance, Minister Godard.
I do not
He was then implicated in the report, if I understand correctly.
I do not have any information around that. I'm happy to check if it was sent from our side. I don't have any information of us sending that report to the former minister.
You don't follow politics, perhaps in the budget, that the minister responded to a KPMG report in the budget, and that he did not agree with the findings of the report.
I think let's pass that one, because KPMG compiled the report, presented it to SARS. So whatever happened to the report would have happened from the SARS side ordinarily, unless if something extraordinary happened.
Thanks, Chair. You just led me into perhaps the question that I should pose. You've written the letter to SARS on the 15th of September. Have you had any response from SARS, for the record, on this letter that the legal opinion should no longer be relied on?
We have requested an engagement with SARS in order to discuss it further.
Yes, ma'am. The question is, you've requested it, you've sent them a letter. Was there any response from SARS as to the present date?
To the present date, we have received response around trying to set up the meeting, but we haven't been able to confirm the meeting as yet.
Ma'am, you had no reply from SARS with regards to the legal opinions that you've indicated could not be relied on. It was never questioned by SARS, because this is rather significant. The conclusions, recommendations, perhaps you've nullified with a letter, but there was a legal opinion, and then the legal opinion should not be relied on. And the partner that paid 23 million to your company has not responded and say, what has happened to the legal opinion? Why is the legal opinion considered to be inaccurate? You will agree with me, it's a very strange scenario.
So I would not be able to interpret it short of saying that there has been a public response to our letter and our communication initially to SARS. However, we haven't had the opportunity as yet to engage directly with SARS.
Yes, thank you. I will accept that I'm close to completion, sir, Mr. Chairperson. But just to understand the impact of a report that is actually predetermined in the eyes of the public, it is hugely concerning. It is very unethical, and it shows a lack of responsibility from an auditing firm that is held in high regard by the world. And certainly I believe that we would hope that you would also respond to us if there's any help that you can give this committee and the Finance Committee, that my colleague, the Honourable Mania, is also attending to that committee, that you will respond to us in writing. We would appreciate that. And thank you very much for engaging with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, as usual, I have quite a lot of things I would like to cover. Thank you to KPMG for coming in today. I appreciate you being here. The style that we approach here is a conversation style, so we'll just go back and forth. You may direct who answers questions. I'm entirely comfortable with that. I understand that you're new in the job, and welcome, and we certainly hope that you do well. First area I want to canvass is KPMG provides a range of services to the state. In fact, let me take one step backwards. One of the main reasons we have you here today is because you are suppliers to the state to the tune of many, many millions, as Mr. Modise advised us. And that's why I believe we have every right to chat to you. Because effectively, especially if you look at the Constitutional Court judgment relating to CPS earlier this year, CPS effectively almost became a functionary of the state, simply because they did so. They were doing work for the state in terms of SASSA payments. So we regard you as a partner. You do a lot of work for various entities and departments, that's agreed. How do you avoid the conflict between player and referee? If you're providing forensic services, consulting services, how do you then also handle audits on behalf of the AG? How do you avoid that?
I think one of the key criteria that we look at is we don't mark our own homework. So where we provide audit services, we're very conscious in terms of IFAC and other regulations that we don't perform other services which give rise to a conflict.
Okay, so you like to avoid conflict. Okay, so let's go into some of the issues at hand here. If you like to avoid conflict, why did you not ask a completely independent body or completely independent firm to review your work done on Linkway and on SARS? Why did you go straight to KPMG International? Was it a case of, let's try and clean this up in-house and see what happens? Because only later you're saying an independent inquiry. Why didn't you start there?
As a global member firm, one of the things that we do have an advantage of is people who are not working directly with us being able to check our work according to the standards and methodologies set by the firm globally. That is a reason why we started there with International.
Do you realize that KPMG International can in no way, shape or form be regarded as an independent body? They are your mother body. How can you regard them as independent in terms of looking at your affairs?
So the request to KPMG International was to conduct a review based on our standards. So the independent inquiry we see as a separate body with a different level of independence. International was
My
doing.
question was, is why didn't you go there in the first place? Why was the first stopgap, let's do it in-house, and then if the public really goes mad and the media gets really crazy on this thing, then we'll, oh, okay, let's have an independent inquiry. Why didn't you start with the independent inquiry?
As I mentioned, that decision was taken previously in the last 3 months. So the detailed reasons of why I cannot be able to provide myself.
If I might just add, URBA had announced its investigation into Linkway specifically, early on. So, we are mindful of that ongoing investigation.
All right, okay, let's go to Linkway. KPG, the auditing firm of Linkway, it's common cause, the fuss about Linkway. So let's just get into some of the specifics. It was established that there were inquiries about the nature of related party relationships, my apologies, and the commercial substance of significant unusual transactions. Can you please explain what that means to the committee? There are two issues there, party relationships and unusual transactions.
Yeah, so the commentary that we made in our media statement points to the fact that our work in those respects were insufficient. And we commented on that in our media statement. Insofar as related parties are concerned, that relates to those other parties that could have a connection to the Oak Bay Group. Sorry, your second question?
Well, I want to know what, you've used euphemistic language there, unusual practices, related party relationships. Let's dig down into it. What did you see on review that led you to reflect that your initial team had missed that? What was it? What were the specific tell us what the significant unusual transactions were.
There were significant transactions within the Oak Bay Group which occurred in the years 2014 onwards, large in amount, capital flows, which in the opinion of KPMGI when they did the investigation, necessitated more work than we did on those audits. They constituted red flags, one of the red flags that we referred to in the media statement.
Okay, so who at KPMG did the initial work and didn't pick up those red flags? I'm not asking you to name persons, I'd like to know what their position was, because that's important.
So in the conduct of any audit, it's supervised by an engagement partner, an engagement manager and a team. So the primary responsibility sits with that audit team that would have conducted the audit annually.
Okay, are you familiar with the wording of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, specifically Section 34?
I'm not, but I am aware of the Act.
Okay, so, well, it's problematic that you don't know the wording because it's quite important. Are you aware of the fact that you have a duty to report criminal activity?
We are.
Okay. So Section 1 of that particular section sets out that you have that duty. Section 2 says that if you don't do it, it's an offence. And then Section 4, G, H, and I set out who is liable to do that. And if you have a look at the sections of the Act, you'll see that your team falls squarely into that group. Okay, your initial team that would have seen these unusual practices. And so my question is was any reporting, and the Act says to a police officer, was any reporting like that done?
We have now fulfilled all of our reporting obligations.
Yeah. At the time, was any, I'm asking you a very simple question. At the time, did the team that was dealing with the Linkway issue, did they go to a police officer who they found on the side of the street and said, I have a suspicion, because the Act also says that, it's a suspicion, you don't need proof, a suspicion of that. Did they do that?
They did not, but what I would say is that that was not identified as, at the time, as something qualifying in terms of PRECA.
Okay, you've just told me that you've subsequently done the work that needed to be done, but at the time you didn't think it. Now you've just told me at the time it didn't seem to be necessary. How can you comment on that? How do you know it wasn't necessary at the time?
Based on the work that KPMGI has done on that file.
So KPMGI raised a whole lot of red flags. Your international guys who came in raised a whole lot of red flags that the local guys didn't see. Okay? And now you're telling me that although KPMG raised the flags, correct, we agree on that. Now you're saying that the local KPMG guys had no obligation to see those flags that should have been raised in the first place.
Yeah, I would say that not all the red flags relate to corrupt practices that qualify in terms of PRECA.
Okay, I'm trying to get to to consequence manager. Look, it's quite clear. It's common. It's public record that it didn't happen. Okay, there was no action taken by KPMG employees or managers or whatever the case may be in terms of the PRECA Act, as it's called. So now Section 2 of Section 34.2 says it's an offence. Have KPMG, as part of this wonderful cleanup that you're doing, have you laid any charges against those members because they've committed offence in terms of the law?
Not at this stage, but certainly, you know, the commitment that we have given is that to the extent that we need to, we will.
Okay, you see, now this one, I want to now get into, there's so many things I want to cover, but let's stop here. You have, since this whole thing exploded in the media, cleaned house, and you've moved people on and moved them out. So let's start there. We have a lovely report here from Treasury this morning, which gives us a full list of all the persons that have been named, and although it has been done in the media, I have no intention of reading out the names. But what I would like to know is what has happened to these persons. Do you have a copy of this? Anyway, it's the list of your chairman of the board, your CEO, chief operating officer. You know who all these people are. So my question is, we see that you've been very generous in terms of wanting to refund SARS for work done, which is interesting. Let's stop there for a second. Are you saying that all the work you did for SARS was absolutely useless? Is that what you're saying?
So we've said to that, the answer to that question has been the international team did not redo the work. So the quality of the actual work itself and the redoing of it hasn't happened. What has happened is checking against our processes, methodologies, and risk management processes. It's not redoing the work that we have done.
No, you're not answering the question. The initial bill to SARS for the rogue unit report, the rogue unit work was 23 million rand, am I right?
Yes, you're right.
So by saying we'll give you a refund, you're saying that entire report was a waste of time. Is that right?
We are acknowledging the significance of getting those recommendations and conclusions incorrect.
Okay, you see, this makes no commercial sense. If I buy a car from you, and maybe that's a bad example, but let's say I buy something from you and 80% of it works, I would say to you, give me a 20%. Why are you giving a total 100% refund? Why are you being so generous?
So as mentioned earlier on, the 80% has not been reviewed in terms of redoing the work and making sure that we can ensure that the work was done to the quality standards in the same way.
Okay. So are you saying that the entire report you did for SARS in terms of that special unit was a complete waste of time and therefore you're not charging for it? Is that what you're saying? In other words, we should set aside all of that work 100%.
What we are saying is that the bulk of the work that was done was completed according to our processes. We don't have, at the moment, information that shows that the work in every single line, in every single report was checked. International didn't manage to do that. However, from a procedural and risk management process,
Just a minute. So are you saying that your KPMG International only reviewed the conclusions, recommendations, and the legal opinion only, and as for the rest, they didn't? Or they did and found them to be correct, except those three elements that are withdrawn?
Just to come in, Chair, thank you. The message that we're sending is that International reviewed our level of compliance against the methodologies we have,
That's fine.
policies and
No,
processes.
no, wait. What I'm asking is, what is it that they reviewed? Did they review those three parts that they withdrew, or they reviewed the entire report and said, these parts are fine, except for these three, therefore we're withdrawing them?
They reviewed our level of compliance to methodologies in respect of the three parts. The part that was found wanting is the one dealing with the legal opinions, the conclusions, and the recommendations.
Okay, so there were three parts, one was found to defective. So why don't you just refund 1/3? Let me tell you where I'm going here. Your entire approach to this thing smacks of let's buy a way out of this problem. Okay? You're giving a full refund on work done. 23 million rand is a chunk of change. You also, in your report here, on your own version, giving 40 million rand to any charity that fights corruption. Okay? Why are you being so generous about this? Why are you issuing 63 million rands worth of your money out on this whole issue? And that begs the next question, is on the SARS investigation, and I come back to it again, is the entire report worthless? Because effectively what we've been asked to accept here is that we must just disregard that report. And my concern with that, so I've got two issues. You're being extremely generous, and that makes me suspicious. Okay? And then on the other side, you know, I used to do forensic investigations before I got involved in politics. And I know that in a particular job, there are going to be kernels of truth. There's going to be a body of evidence that collated, especially by people in the field, that have some evidentiary material to it. It's some truth to it. And it's very difficult to say, right, it's all rubbish, it's all completely useless. So my question is how much of that report is problematic and how much is actually very, very useful, and why are you giving a full refund on it?
Okay, perhaps just to deal with both aspects. So the part that relates to conclusions and recommendations is the part that KPMG have indicated cannot be relied upon. The part that relates to the factual findings, which basically involved compilation of key findings from a documentary review of more than 850,000 emails, more than 1 million documents, which took place over 6 months, 30 people. So KPMG didn't re-perform that work. What they did do is look at the processes, the controls, KPMG's policies and procedures around how that was compiled. So based on that, they were satisfied there was no reason, in their view, to withdraw that aspect of the report, but certainly as it relates to the conclusions and recommendations, that part was indicated that could not be relied upon. So when we considered the sanction, given the impact of the media statement and the comment we've made in that regard, it was the view of the board and the leadership of our firm that we should refund the full fee, given the impact that has had.
Okay. All right. Now, this was a little side alley we went down, so let's come back to the main point. The main point was I was making the issue about staff that worked on Linkway, and the same question can be asked is staff that worked on the SARS investigation, on the SARS work, were they, I see that your KPMG International report states that no illegality was picked up by them. and I've pointed out before that they're not exactly independent, but be that as it may. They say that no illegality was picked up. The Act refers to a suspicion of illegality, the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. So, did any of the people that worked on the SARS investigation, did they take any actions in terms of PRECA?
Repeat that question. Sorry, who took
The
what
people
actions?
that worked on the SARS investigation, when they discovered that, Mr. Saying, your initial report says that you had all the factual findings and then you did recommendations that there was a rogue unit. That's your original report. That was there.
Correct.
That there was a rogue unit. Subsequently, you said no, that wasn't the case. So, therefore, it follows that the persons who did the work on the initial work must have suspected illegality, because a rogue unit's illegal, right? By its very definition, rogue. Did those persons take any actions in terms of PRECA when they discovered that there was what they suspected to be illegality going on, and which thoughts finally found their way into a final rogue unit report? Was any action taken then? And why not if it wasn't?
Okay, well, I can't confirm that. Mshlami?
We cannot confirm that. However, the reports were given to our client. So I think just to mention that it's important to us that we maintain our role as the service provider, and perhaps the client can assist with some of the detailed questions.
I thought you might say that, so I'm ready for you. Because you see, sorry, I just need to open up the document here. Now, because you know, you weren't aware of the wording of the Act, and maybe you should go and have a look. 34G, it now lists, you see, it lists all the persons that are responsible, and I can see the way you're thinking that this is just state people. Well, the unfortunate part is it isn't. So let's look at 34G, because I think it'll be useful. So, F, the executive manager of any bank. This is the people that have a duty to report illegal activities. The executive manager of any bank or any financial institution. Any partner in a partnership. Any person has been appointed as chief executive officer or equivalent officer of any agency, authority, board, etc., and it goes down to company as well. Any person who's responsible for overall management and control of the business of an employer. In other words, all of you. You are specifically named in the Act that there is a duty. So let's come back to the original thrust. What has happened to the persons that have been removed from KPMG?